Hello and welcome to the Hey Boomer Show, the show for those of us who believe we are never too old to set another goal or dream a new dream. My name is Wendy Green and I am your host for Hey Boomer. And today is my birthday, my 70th birthday. And I am feeling so grateful and blessed with all the love and good wishes that I've been receiving this birthday. And I can think of no better way to return this love and appreciation than to offer you the conversation today with Rob Schwartz, the son of Morrie Schwartz, the beloved professor from Tuesdays with Morrie. In the early 2000s, Rob discovered the manuscript that was to become the beautiful book, The Wisdom of Morrie. After much family discussion, it was decided that Rob should edit and have the book published. Morrie wrote this manuscript between 1988 and 1992 before he was diagnosed with the ALS that they talk about in Tuesdays with Morrie. Rob had the opportunity to discuss the book with his dad while his dad was writing it. In The Wisdom of Morrie, Morrie shares his thoughts on things like aging joyfully and the discrimination and pain of ageism. He talks about becoming the best person we can be. Morrie discusses morals and ethics and living a meaningful life, finding hope when we feel that there is none. And as I was reading it, I felt like I was reading his personal journal. And each part of it caused me to stop and think and reflect and, try to internalize it. It's not a book to be read quickly. As Morrie says in the introduction, take the time to think about an issue carefully. Look at it from many sides and talk about it, perhaps even in a discussion group, talking with friends, peers, and family is crucial. You may benefit from keeping a journal of your thoughts and reactions. Allow the time, the ideas they deserve, and think about them. Morrie dedicated his life to helping people understand their relationships to society, other people, and themselves. This book, The Wisdom of Morrie, is his gift to us. And this conversation is my gift to you. So we have less than an hour to talk about this, and I want to get right into it. So I'm going to bring Rob on and do a brief introduction so that we can start our conversation. Hey, Rob.
Hey, Wendy.
Thanks for being with me today. I'm so excited.
It's my honor, and thank you for having me on your momentous occasion of your 70th. I didn't realize it was your 70th. You look fantastic, by the way. I never would have guessed.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Us boomers, we all are like evolving in a different way these years.
Right.
You're
I
a
have
boomer.
something to say about the whole boomer thing. Maybe we can leave that to the end. Not that there's anything wrong with boomer, but I get lumped in with the boomers, and I don't feel like a boomer at all, right? Because I'm right at the end of what's supposed to be a boomer, but the difference between being born in 1945 and like 1963 is pretty gigantic.
There's a big difference there.
Yeah,
there is a big difference.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, let me do a brief intro, Rob. Give them a little bit of your background.
Sure.
Okay. So Rob Schwartz is a writer, producer, and entrepreneur. His work has appeared in Time, Newsweek, Variety, The Hollywood Reporter, Interview, and Melody Maker, among others. He was a script editor at NHK World TV for 14 years and has been an Asia correspondent for Billboard magazine since 2008. In 2005, he founded the electro rock crossover label Dynastic Records in Japan. Rob also produces feature films, including Putty Hill in 2010 and Bernard and Huey in 2017. He actively invests in tech-based startups and is currently a partner in the virtual concert creation platform mosh pit. Wow, you're busy.
Yeah, try my best, you know.
And now you're a writer and editor for your
Book.
dad's book.
Yeah.
So let's set the context of the book, The Wisdom of Morrie. You say it was written between 1988 and 1992, and that you had the opportunity to discuss it with your dad while he was writing it. So tell us about your discussions and your interactions with your dad.
Sure. So a little bit of background first. I was like a prodigal son. I skidded off to Asia at the first opportunity after I graduated from university. And I was there for a couple of years traveling and working. And in the summer of 1989, I came back home to the family house, which was in Newton, Massachusetts. Mitch describes it so eloquently in Tuesdays with Morrie, with the maple tree in front, that house. And I lived at home for 3 months before I returned to Asia. This was a sort of a lull for me. Didn't have a job. You know, I was preparing to go back to Asia. So I was with my dad pretty much every day, and he was right in the middle of working on this book. So I had the opportunity to sit with him and talk with him about his ideas and share stuff with him. And it was a little funny because, you know, I was in my 20s, you know, mid 20s at this time, and he was writing a book about aging, but he was really interested to bounce the ideas off me and see what I thought and see how he thought that I felt they would be received and stuff like that. So I had a great background in this book, and it's, you know, it's very serendipitous that I just happened to be home during those 3 months that he was writing the book, because pretty much the rest of the time, that's the last time I lived at home. I mean, I visited a lot, and I was certainly with my father a lot while he was ill, but I had a residence in Tokyo, and I was living in Tokyo for many, many years, including basically the whole rest of the time my father was alive, after, you know, that 3 months in 1989. So it was really wonderful to be able to share that time with him and, you know, get a hold of his ideas. He really felt motivated to write this book because in 1986, he had been more or less forced to retire from Brandeis University. This used to be a thing. It's not really a thing anymore for professors. Right. But in those days, at 70, they basically pushed you out. They tried to have him retire at 65, and he refused. And then again at 68, and he refused again. And at 70, they said, yeah, you don't have any choice. So wow. That was 1986. And he was thinking about this whole concept of that society viewed him as an aging person. He never viewed himself that way. And he was always around young people and full of energy and full of vibrancy, as you can get from this book. But he realized that society viewed him that way. And he didn't really like it. And he had to investigate, do I have a problem with this? And he sort of realized that he had this internalized ageism, which he discusses in the beginning of the book. And he realized that it's so pervasive that we just have this negative image of people over a certain age that, you know, can't do anything. They should just go sit in the corner and leave people alone. And he just thought, this is so wrong and so poisonous. And that's what motivated him to write the book.
That's so interesting. There's a couple of things that come up for me as you say that. One is his discussion about ageism, I think, was so far ahead of his time. I mean, that's become like a buzzword these days. You know, we talk about ageism as the last ism that's being addressed in the workforce. Yes. And your dad was talking about it in 1988.
That's right.
It's pretty amazing. The other thing that comes up for me, though, Rob, is you said, you know, he was talking to you about this, trying to get your impression as a young man. You were in your 20s. Right. Do you think he was thinking ahead and saying, you know, at some point, your age group is going to be faced with this and having to think about these things?
I don't know. I mean, he didn't present it to me that way when we discussed it. He might have been thinking that. I think that he was just interested to get some feedback on the ideas. And, you know, I studied philosophy in university, so I have a sort of philosophical mind, as did he. I mean, I got a lot of it from him. And, you know, he wanted on that sort of level to bounce the ideas off and see if it sort of made sense or held together as a way of thinking. And I'll say one other thing about the ageism. Not only was he very much ahead of his time in addressing ageism, he even coined a phrase to isolate a particular type of ageism, which he called age casting. He took from the idea of typecasting, the way you typecast an actor. And he said elderly people or seniors are pushed into a certain role in society, which is basically the role of a useless person. And obviously, this is completely wrong and evil. And so they're age casted. Once you get to a certain age, you're cast into a certain position. And I mean, ageism in general is terrible. And this is a specific form of it, which he identified.
Yeah. Yeah, he was so far ahead of his time. It was just amazing to read all of that. So you found this document, this manuscript in his desk in 2000. He passed away in
95. He passed away in 95. I think I found the document in 2002, but I'm not exactly sure of the year. It might have been 2003.
Okay. So what was that like to find it, and why did you now decide to publish it?
Right. Well, as you can imagine, especially since, as I explained, I had talked to him a bunch about these ideas. So I'll set the scene for you, and you can probably intuit my feeling when I explain this. So as you mentioned, I'm a journalist. As I mentioned, I used to go back and forth between Tokyo and Boston to be with my mom after my father passed away. We had a house in Newton, was very comfortable. I had my own room, you know. She was living alone at this point. My brother was in California and still is in California. So I used to sit at his desk and type my, you know, journalistic pieces on my computer. And one day I just pulled open his desk drawer because she had kept his study exactly as it was when he was alive. She hadn't moved anything. So he had hundreds of books, and even papers were around. Sometimes I would look at the papers, but you know, they didn't mean that much to me. And then I pulled open this desk drawer and there was this big black thing. It's not small. I mean, he had bound it with hard, like cardboard cover. It was not like a little tiny book or, you know, some typed pages of manuscript. It was a big, heavy thing. And I was like, what's this? And I opened it up and, you know, it was like discovering hidden treasure, because not only was it my father's words and his ideas and things that I had heard about and thought were valuable, but now it was in the context of Tuesdays with Morrie, which it hadn't been in that context before when I had ever thought about it, right? So immediately it struck me as like, okay, we have an opportunity to do something with this, because it would have been hard if Tuesdays with Morrie hadn't existed. I'm not sure that I could have gotten it published. Maybe some editor would have said, this is good, let's publish it. But you know how the publishing world is. If you don't have a name, if you're not known for something, anything really, then it's really hard. And he was now a known quantity, and I knew that we would be able to publish it. And I should add that that is all due to Tuesdays with Morrie, and my family owes Mitch Albom an incredible debt of gratitude for what he did and writing that wonderful book, which is so accessible to everybody. And so, I mean, it's almost lyrical, that book, you know.
Yeah, that book really does give you an insight into your dad. But in fact, I went back and read it, because when I read this book, The Wisdom of Morrie, I saw so much in there that was positive and uplifting, in a way to, even if you're in despair, was his word, even if you're feeling in despair, you could, you know, reignite your hope. And I thought, was he really able to do that after he had ALS? And as I reread The Wisdom of Tuesdays with Morrie, it seemed like he was.
Sure. I mean, I think the answer to that is yes, but it's not as easy, or it wasn't as easy for him as maybe some people, you know, imagine. Like, he was a positive guy, so he got this, you know, fatal diagnosis and he said, that's fine, I'm going to be positive. No, not at all. He struggled with it. And there's a very powerful clip you may or may not be, I have a feeling you will be familiar with. There's 3 programs done by Ted Koppel on his Nightline news magazine show, which was the biggest news magazine show in the 90s, right? Called Nightline. And they had my father on 3 times because it was so popular. Usually they only did one episode on one thing and moved on. They had Dad on 3 times and also watched the progression of his illness. But I think it's the first or second time they had him on, he talks about how sometimes he gets up in the morning and he's totally morose and he has to like mourn for himself and cry, but he makes a conscious decision like, I am going to be positive. I'm going to live the life, the fullest life that I can now and contribute what I can now, you know, whatever the circumstances. It's a real conscious decision and not an easy one. I mean, you know, it's not easy for anybody. So I don't want people to have any illusion that he was somehow, it didn't affect him or he had this indomitable spirit that nothing could touch. Not like that at all. It was a struggle for him. And I think it's a struggle for everybody. 1, who have any kind of illness, and 2, in general. I mean, life is a struggle in some ways, emotionally and, you know, even intellectually in a lot of different ways. So, you know, if you're struggling, don't think that my father didn't go through exactly the same thing. He did.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that, Rob. You know, I also lived with a father who was a very positive person. And there is a part of that that is hard to live with because you start to feel like, well, I can't turn it off and turn it on that quickly and that easily as he seems to be able to do. So have you learned some techniques for yourself that help you to turn on the positive?
Sure. And some of them were in the book. I mean, it's funny because I've talked about this topic a lot. And as I talk about it, I sort of notice that my life and a lot of the things in the book are kind of interwoven. And that's not surprising because he was my father and we were very, very close. And a lot of the things that he taught me, you know, weren't necessarily sitting down and giving a lecture, but whatever, by, you know, example or by just in the air, you sort of pick it up. And some things were maybe more stated. But for example, it's in the book, and I also try and emulate this. And as I said, I spent a lot of time in Asia. I mean, I think meditation is a wonderful tool. It can be totally separate from any kind of religion or spirituality, or it doesn't have to be. It depends on you. But it can just totally be a technique to calm your mind, to calm your energy, to focus. And, you know, it's wonderful. And I certainly practice that. And my father talks about it a lot in the book.
And he talked about meditation and mindfulness. Yeah.
Yes.
I'm curious. You are a creative person. You've created music, you've created film, you've created, you know, all kinds of articles. This manuscript, which you edited but didn't write, how were you able to tap into your own creativity while you were editing it?
That's an interesting question. You know, creativity is an interesting and in some ways tricky thing. So I'll try and answer the best I can. So first of all, I should note that I did write 2 essays. I write an essay in the beginning of the book and the end of the book. The essay in the beginning of the book is more about my dad. The essay at the end of the book is more about my mom. So it's about our family. They're both about the story of this book and how it came to be and my participation and so on. About the editing in terms of my creativity, I mean, there's a little bit here and there about a turn of phrase, or I retitled some of the sections to try and capture what my father was saying. But for the most part, one of the key aspects of editing this book was maintaining my father's voice. If you've read the book, and I know you have, you'll understand that his voice comes through so strong and so pure in this book that was my number one priority, was not to alter that or, you know, filter it in any way. So, I mean, I think that is also a kind of creativity, right? Creativity is an interesting thing, to be able to craft something to make it better, but to keep the essence of it, in this case, his voice, that's a creative task in and of itself. And we can talk specifically about the editing, if you like, how I edited what I did. But in answer to your question, I think that's how I express my creativity for this book. for
Sure,
editing.
go on. Tell us about the editing.
Well, my father was an academic, right? Now, this is not an academic work. This is very much an everyday work. And in fact, it's even broader than that. It's, as you know, works in stories and poetry and newspaper articles. It changes and offers all of these different things to try and reach you in different ways. So my editing, I really had to try and make it go smoothly. And as I said, my father was an academic, so sometimes he tended to get a little long-winded. So that was the point where I had to step in and say, okay, you've given 3 examples of this. We don't need 7, you know? And I'm serious. I mean, he could be quite long-winded, you know? Okay, you've listed 6 things that people can do. We don't need 18, right?
Right.
I'm barely exaggerating here. You know, he was like that. He was so full of ideas. So it was a matter of cutting things out and trimming it down so it would be a little bit more digestible. I think the book is pretty digestible, but it's also pretty long. I mean, you have to, you know, you have to sit down and apply yourself to this book, right?
You do. And I'm glad you talked about the ideas, because I think what I get from a lot of it is that he really wanted to help people by sharing some of these ideas. So if you're stuck on, well, how do I go out and connect with people? Or if you're stuck on, life just looks grim right now, he gives you some very practical ideas of
That's right.
things you can do.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, I want to take this back a step and then I'll go forward with what you said. So that's right. He did write this book specifically to try and help people. And we talked about that in 1989 when I was talking to him. So there were 3 things that he did that specifically in his mind were to try and help people. The first part is about ageism, as we discussed, and a psychological analysis of how this affects people psychologically and how you need to try to rid yourself. I mean, you need to acknowledge it and expel it like all of the other kind of negative attitudes that we have, whether it's racism or sexism and stuff. This is stuff that we learned, you know, as a culture, and we try and get rid of them now because we realize that they're wrong. You know, essentially wrong.
Right.
Just wrong, right? You can't judge somebody by their race. You can't judge somebody by their gender, right? That's just, you know, a plain truth in this day and age. And you can't judge somebody by their age. So that was the first part, to address ageism as a psychological, you know, the psychological aspect of it and try and get people to expunge it. So as you know, my father was a social psychologist. That was his background. That was his orientation. That was his initial approach to this book. That's just the first way in which he tries to help people. The second way, as you note, is he gives specific stories, techniques, ideas to try and get people to be able to live more vibrantly or more creatively or address something in their life that is, you know, making them less happy, whether it's despair, whether it's loneliness. He goes into very specific things in the second half of the book. So in that way, I feel like there's kind of 2 halves to the book. The first half about the psychological analysis, and the second half is really practical tips. And the third thing is more general, as I've sort of already noted. He uses so many different things. He drops in stories. There's so many stories, you know, of the 95-year-old guy who's just graduated from college and wants to become a doctor, you know, or whatever. There's a lot of stories like that. When he's trying to take you sort of out of the narrative of the book or the ideas of the book and more appeal to your imagination. That's why there's stories and poetry and newspaper articles. And, you know, it's not his voice then. It's somebody else's story, somebody else's voice. So it's sort of got those 3 aspects to it.
It really is a beautiful story. So if you had to kind of summarize what your dad's outlook on life was, his philosophy of life, how would you describe that?
Oh, you know, actually, I've done a lot of these, and that's actually the first time I've ever been asked that. There's a lot of different answers. I'll go with the one that is most applicable to this book. So my father had this incredible empathy for other people, to be able to feel their pain, to feel their joy, to feel what they were feeling. And this led him to believe, since he felt so deeply what other people were feeling, that a world in which we were, unified and everybody lived in harmony with everybody else, and we didn't have wars or economic disparity, people starving to death. Obviously there's always going to be disease, but that's something else. Social problems, and he wrote a lot about social problems in terms of the academic world, but that's something else. He saw we could have a world without those things, kind of, somebody would call him an idealistic world or whatever, along the lines of John Lennon in the song Imagine, right? So I would say that, yeah, absolutely. So I would say that fundamentally, that was his philosophy of life. If we could just reach enough people and get them to understand that we're all the same, people all over the world are the same, have the same concerns, the same troubles, the same, basic values. Everyone loves their family. Everyone wants to live a good, comfortable life. No one really wants to hurt anybody else. If we could understand that as a society and as a world, we could live in a much, much better world. So I think fundamentally that was his philosophy, and it was informed by his personal experiences, which we can talk about. And he does talk about in this book, and he also is mentioned in Tuesdays with Morrie. So I can go into that if you want.
Yeah, please.
So that was informed by the death of his mother. He lost his mother at 8 years old. And it was so painful for him, and he felt so much sadness that it actually took him decades and decades to fully process that and to grieve for her. And that's what made him, in his view, and I think it's true, so sensitive to other people's pain and ability to feel what they were feeling, because he had had that experience at such a young age. It also informed his academic life and his professional life. I write about this in my essay. His big breakthrough in academically, and was also a huge watershed in social psychiatry, was a book called The Mental Hospital, came out in 1954. He wrote it with a very famous psychiatrist at the time, Alfred Stanton, but it was basically his research in a psychiatric ward. And what he found out was that the relationships between all of the people in the ward affected the patient, not just the patient and doctor or patient and nurse, but like if two doctors were having a disagreement, this would affect the patient. Or if nurses were, fighting among themselves. So he realized that all of us are interconnected, and that we're so sensitive to the emotions and the energies that are around us. And this really informed his whole life and his academic work and his personal life in many ways, some of which I talk about in the essay, and I can talk about now if you like.
Yeah. No, I forgot about the story about his mother. Yeah, and it did take him a while to process that.
Right.
So what was he like as a father?
It's funny because there's really two ways for me to answer this. I mean, when you're a kid, you never think like, oh, my father's perfect, or, doing everything right. You never think that. Even, you love your father and you love him deeply and you look up to him and he's your role model, but you always think like, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about or whatever. So, of course, I was the same as a child. In retrospect, of course, you feel about it very differently. But I do have to say, I mean, he was a pretty wonderful father. He didn't have any of those, what shall we call them, faults that we hear about other fathers. He was very emotionally accessible. He spent a lot of time with me. He never or rarely got, angry or for no reason. He was not abusive. Obviously the idea of physical punishment was completely, foreign to him. I mean, there might have been a few times when he was, you know, when I was little and my brother was little, when he might have sort of like alluded to the fact that there was a possibility that something might happen to us if we kept behaving badly. And he would never, ever have laid a finger on us. That was just so foreign to him, that idea that you would, you know, hit your child or something like that. So he was a pretty amazing father. I mean, I can't really find a fault with him. He spent a lot of time with us. He was very involved with our lives. He loved having children. He talks about that in Tuesdays with Morrie, and he talks about it a little bit in this book. There's a section on family in Tuesdays with Morrie where he talks about it. And, you know, he says it's the most wonderful thing in the world. So, yeah, he was a pretty spectacular father.
Yeah, I bet he was. So you mentioned that you don't feel like a boomer, although you are. You're right on the cutting edge of it.
I mean, depends. I'll talk to you about that. I'm going to cut you off because there's this guy that came up with this concept of people born. I think he cuts it off at about 1958 or 57 to 64. And he says these people are not boomers. I can't remember the author's name, but he calls them the Jones generation. And he really separates it. So, you know, this is a cultural trope. Oh, we have this generation, we have that generation, the greatest generation, boomers, Generation X. But I'm kind of born on the border of Generation X. The guy who wrote the book called Generation X is born right around the same time as me. And yeah, I mean, I never felt like, you know, I was part of the 60s or anything like that. When I was in high school, we felt like the 60s were ancient history. Now, of course, they were only like 8 years before. But when you're a teenager, something 8 years before is ancient history. You know, we listened to some music that was the 60s, and we listened to music that was influenced by the 60s. But we also listened to like punk and new wave, which was a reaction against the 60s, right? Or against psychedelic 60s music.
That's too bad. You missed all the good music. But
there's a difference if we're like 9 years or
you weren't out protesting the war and all of that good stuff.
I've never protested the war. That was history for me.
Well, those were the good old days. But
I'm not criticizing. I'm just saying I don't personally feel like a boomer. I know people who are similar to my age who do feel like boomers. And I was a little surprised when they told me, oh, yeah, when I was 12, I was wearing bell bottoms. It's like, I was not wearing bell bottoms when I was 12. So, you know, everyone's
but here's really where I was going with that question.
Okay.
So you're 60, right?
A little older than that, but
a little older than that. Okay. So as your dad is in this book and you've worked on this book and now you're speaking about the book, The Wisdom of Morrie, and it's about, so much of it is about ageism and making peace with where we are and, you know, accepting regrets and learning from our past and all of this. How has that had an impact on you as you start to look at, 70, 80, that's not that far off now.
Right. Well, I mean, I don't know if I'm replicating my father's experience or, you know, approach to it, but I never felt old. I never felt even like I was aging. You work in music, there's a lot of young people. You work in film, you work creatively. There's people younger than you, and I'm starting to feel just like my dad, maybe it happened to him at 70, like, oh, maybe I am, you know, aging a little bit. So I'm just coming in to that whatever attitude or understanding or mindset where, you know, maybe some of these things apply to me. I don't feel like I'm aging yet, but I'm certainly getting close to it. And yeah, you need to think about, like, how am I going to approach this? What am I going to do? And I think one of the major things, which my father talks about a little bit in this book, but not that much, is, you know, you need to keep in good physical shape. I mean, that's something that we've learned, I think, is really emphasized now or in the last 15 years and wasn't emphasized so much like 40 years ago or 30 years ago, you know, when my father was aging, though he was very active. He was always walking and he swam regularly, but you really need to do physical activity. This is going to extend your life. I mean, this is proven. This is going to extend your life. Like, you need to walk or swim or go to the gym or do some physical activity almost every day, certainly every week. And this is what's going to keep you active and energetic. And, you know, that's something I'm trying to integrate into my life, because obviously I'm a journalist. I'm used to sitting at my computer writing or, you know, whatever. So.
Right. Well, I mean, I think, as your dad said in this book, you know, we aging is a privilege, right? If we get to that stage where we're now going to look at the next horizon, it's a privilege, because not everybody gets there. So,
right. Well, you'll love a joke that my father used to tell. He would say, yeah, getting old is not great, but it beats the alternative.
Beat the alternative. That's right.
It's only one other alternative.
That's right. So we have a question here. What do you think your dad's take would be on social media and all the good and the bad that comes with that?
Right. Well, that's the last part of that question that hits the nail on the head. Good and bad. I think he would see the good and the bad. I mean, social media, when you really think about it, is incredibly paradoxical, right? Or ironic, because we are so connected now to anybody in the world. One of my best friends, who became a very good friend of mine when we both lived in Japan, we actually ran a company together. He is an Instagram influencer. He travels around the world, and I am in constant touch with him, you know, more than daily touch with him via one of the text apps, you know, and he's constantly in, you know, Dubai or Egypt or the South Pacific. I think currently he's in India, you know. So we can be incredibly connected to people through social media, yet the overall effect of it is to make us much more isolated from people than we were before. We're constantly staring at our phones. We're not focused on what's right in front of us. We don't relate to the people around us. We don't stop and have random conversations with people the way we used to, because we're just like looking at our phone, you know, and not aware of what's around us. So it's a paradox. And my father would say, it's great to be more connected, but maybe sometime be aware of your surroundings, maybe interact with the people in your immediate surroundings. I have to say, it's something that I do. And, you know, lots of people relate to it well, some people don't. But I'll strike up random conversations with people around me just because I love to talk to people, you know, and find out what they're about. And some people are receptive and some people are not, and that's fine. But to answer the question, I think he would be critical of people who are constantly focused on their phone. It's fine to do that sometimes, and it's wonderful to be in touch with people all around the world, but also focus on your immediate surroundings, the people around you, and maybe try and make a connection with them.
I love that. And I do the same thing, Rob. I talk to people in the grocery store line and stuff.
I can believe that, having talked to you a few times.
I know Rob and I are best buddies now. So here's another great question, though, because you lived this. Okay. So what advice might you offer to children of aging parents when they're ill? How to be best supportive and offer them support and encouragement?
Right. This is a complex question, actually. So I'm going to approach it from two different ways. So the first way is, obviously you want to be as supportive as you can, but you need to be supportive in the way that they want you to be supportive. You need to talk to them and say, what can I do? What should I not do? What makes you uncomfortable? And maybe some people will be uncomfortable with attention being showered on them, or somebody doting on them, or, you know, always hovering over them. Are you okay? You know, can I do something for you? A lot of people are not comfortable with that. So you need to talk to them and find out what they're comfortable with and find the ways that you can help them and support them in ways that fit, that they're comfortable with. So that's the first part of the answer. The second part of the answer is a more personal one, but I also think it works for everybody, maybe on different levels, which is that when an aging parent is ill, you have to realize that they're probably not going to be around. They're certainly not going to be around forever, and they're probably not going to be around for that much longer. So you really have to make the time to, relate to them, talk to them, figure out ways to share. Some people are not as verbal as other people. Figure out ways to share things. And again, you have to be strategic about it. You can't impose what you want on the person. You have to find the meeting point where it's comfortable for both of you. And a side note on something that I did that has been incredibly meaningful to me, and maybe in the future will be to other people, is that for my father, and of course my dad was incredibly verbal and he was meeting all sorts of people, and that's captured in Tuesdays with Morrie. He was having discussion groups and he was having friends over. So I set up a video camera in his study, and I have hours and hours of videotape of him, just random days where he was talking to people. And of course, he was already ill, so we knew that he wasn't going to be around forever. But just watching the videotape, makes me feel so close to him. Now, maybe not everybody will be comfortable with a video camera being set up, but you can ask, you can find out, and it's been incredibly valuable. I should note that I actually shared those tapes with Mitch, and some of Tuesdays with Morrie is based on the videotape that I shot that Mitch incorporated into the book. So, it's paid dividends thousands of times over in terms of, emotional impact for me and also for people in the world, which is an incredible thing. And that's all thanks to Mitch. Yeah.
That's beautiful. The wisdom of Rob.
Well.
So The Wisdom of Morrie is the book that Morrie Schwartz wrote before he got ALS, before Mitch Albom's Tuesdays with Morrie. And Rob has given us this gift by editing this book and making it possible for all of us to learn from Morrie, which is truly, I'm so grateful that you did this, Rob, and that you came on the show. I just want to ask if there's one or two takeaways. It's hard because there's so much in this book, but there's one or two takeaways that you feel like are the most impactful that you want to leave with our audience today.
Right. All right. So as we mentioned earlier, my father says lots of techniques. He offers lots of specific techniques to try and maybe make your life more vibrant or more creative. And of course, some of them will speak to you and some of them won't. So I may say ones and it be meaningless to you, or it may be meaningful. But my father fundamentally felt what gives your life meaning is your relationship with other people. He said many times, at the end of your life, when you're on your deathbed, the size of your bank account is not going to matter at all. But the times that you shared with the people who are meaningful for you is going to be extremely important. So obviously, share as much as you can with the people who are most meaningful for you. And the extension of that is that you can create new relationships. You can go out and meet new people, assuming, you're relatively healthy in your aging state. You have time. You can, and this is hard for a lot of people, or not comfortable for a lot of people, to reach out and talk to people they don't know. But one way to achieve that, and my father talks about this in the book, is to figure out what you're interested in and pursue that interest. And then you can meet other people who are interested in the same thing. And that's an easy way to connect with people and form new relationships about your shared interest. And then, of course, it can take off from there, where you learn more about each other and hopefully end up, caring about each other.
Right. Rob, thank you so much. Let me tell people how they can find out more. There is a website, wisdomofmorrie.com, that you can check out and find out more. And Rob also graciously is sharing his email address with us, which is ganga mati@yahoo.com. And just as a little aside, if you have a little independent bookstore near you that you think would be a good place for Rob to come speak, drop him an email and let him know about that.
Absolutely. And can I add one thing? Obviously, I hope people read the book and enjoy the book and get something from it. And if you do that, I would really appreciate it if you leave a review on Amazon or on Goodreads or on Barnes and Nobles or any site. Those are probably the three that pop to mind, especially Amazon. But it's so important to get reviews out there to let people know what's going on. Because as you mentioned, social media is such a huge part of our life. And as you well know, what drives social media? Algorithms. And how do the algorithms work? The more there is, the more there is. That's the way algorithms work. The larger it is already, the bigger, the more people it exposes it to. So reviews are really, really important.
And I'm going to follow on to that about reviews to say that if you like what you're hearing on Hey Boomer, I want to hear from you too. So I would love for you to leave reviews on Apple or Spotify, or drop me an email at wendy@heyboomer.biz. And I just want to share this message I got from Josephine a couple of weeks ago. And she said, I loved hearing Philip Martin with his enthusiasm and wonderful view of life and lessons learned from his dogs. I think what he is doing and has done is so inspiring. Philip is right that kids are will more easily learn from pets than from an adult. Thanks, Josephine, for what you took the time to share with me. I really do appreciate hearing that what we're doing on this Hey Boomer show makes a difference to you. I also wanted to say that I created a listener survey because, again, I want to hear what you're saying and what you're thinking. I'm going to post this in the show notes. You can see the link here, but I will post it on the website so that you can give me your feedback. And to incentivize you, I'm going to do a random drawing of everybody who participates in the survey. I'm going to do a random drawing for $50 Amazon gift card, so you can use that to buy the Wisdom of Morrie.
Yay.
Yay. Next Monday, I will have landed in Denver, Colorado, and I'll be getting immersed in all things podcast, because I will be at the Podcast Movement Convention, which is the largest podcast convention in the United States. I'm excited and nervous. I am signed up to record a podcast there. So I will be releasing that, but that should be cool because it's going to be like a real studio with real editors and all of that. So I'll release that when I get back. But, there's an extensive catalog of Hey Boomer shows that you can watch while I am not on the air for the next 2 weeks. And I like to leave you with the belief that we can all live with courage, live with relevance, and live with curiosity. And remember that we are never too old to set another goal or dream a new dream. Thanks again, Rob.
Thank you.
My name is Wendy Green, and this has been Hey Boomer.